Let me quickly just say I'm Chantal Carpentier. I'm the chief of the UNCTAD New York office of the Secretary General, and it's a pleasure for me to moderate this session. So let me start by thanking our host at UNCTAD, the UN office in Geneva, as well as the World Academy of Art and Science, for organizing this Global Leadership in the 21st Century conference, which include this high-level panel on this critical issue, which is dear to all of our heart, the Aggies and the foodies, which is health and food security. So our goal today, like other panels, is to discuss one of the many solutions that's been proposed in previous conferences and consultation that's been done by the World Academy of Art and Science, with a potential to have catalytic impact in addressing health and food security. In the think piece that we've all received, the organizers have identified international cooperation to establish regional buffer stocks as such catalytic mechanism, and complemented, of course, by other effort underway at the global and regional level, which many of you are working on, to address the multiple dimension of food security discussed in other sessions today and tomorrow, such as the right food and food security, which will be discussed in the human rights session, human security session, food security to job guarantee program that will be discussed in the economy session, environmental measures, and the impact of agriculture on climate change, school meal program during the pandemic and beyond, impact on dropout rate, which will also be discussed in another session, the role of cooperatives, NGO, and food innovation hubs, innovation strategy to boost investment in food, employment, and other dimension of human security, as well as the integration and research and policymaking and implementation across disciplines, line ministries, specialized agencies, and program, business and civil society. So the position paper emphasized the need for a reliable regional mechanism to stabilize supply and prices to protect both people and farmers, the way the Food Corporation in India does. The buffer stock are generally maintained for essential commodities and necessities like food, grain, and pulse. In India, the buffer stock is used more broadly, is used also as a mechanism to provide production incentive to farmers and stabilize local regional market prices. However, we all know that these buffer stock are expensive and complex to manage. Stock often are higher than required for food security, and when surpluses occur, they're sold on international market, which that oftentimes gets India a challenge at the WTO. So today, what we will be discussing and what could be a good model, is this Indian model a good one or not? And each of these speakers will be talking about this, but from their own perspective, from their own work. Because we all know, of course, that it's very difficult to affect the global prices because they trade at 10 times the underlying value of the commodities. They also can destabilize local national market. And there's several other issues, but I'm not going to go into detail because we have expert here. And what we're going to do is each speaker, starting with Ibrahima Socé, will have 5 minutes to address these issues in the context of their work. And then we will have some questions that will be addressed specifically to them. And then hopefully we'll have some time and we can open up to everybody for questions as well. Then after Ibrahima, we're gonna have Catherine, Ismail, Gerda, Hazel. I'm not gonna introduce them in spirit of keeping time for substantive discussion, but each one of them will take 30 seconds to introduce themselves and how great their work is. So Ibrahima, you have the privilege of starting this discussion. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Chantal. I'm Dr. Socé, Assistant Director General in WHO in charge of emergency response, including outbreak, humanitarian crisis. And you can understand that food security is an important topic for me. And really, I would like to thank United Nations Office and the World Academy of Art and Science for this opportunity. And very pleased to be with my co-panelists. As you can imagine, I will address it from the health and food security angle. And food security, like health, is a fundamental human right. And to realize these rights, each individual and community must have the ability to secure the resources and access the services they need to protect their health and well-being. And unfortunately, we have seen during this COVID-19 pandemic that 40% of the number of people needing humanitarian assistance has increased this year by over 30%, and mainly because of COVID-19. In our recent survey, we have seen also important disruption of health services, in many countries. And so the toxic mix of increased food insecurity and reduced access to health services is really devastating, and we must take radical action to mitigate the potential impact. So the new and protracted conflict limiting humanitarian access further compounds this problem. So greater efforts are needed to secure access, safeguard, preserve, and scale up healthcare, humanitarian food, nutrition, and livelihood assistance. So the crisis we are facing require a multidimensional response, leveraging combined knowledge and capacity of communities, of course, national and international actors toward a common goal by building on existing multi-sectoral collaboration and fostering new one to improve the design and the delivery of our joint response. We must intensify our joint approach to analyze and for programming and monitoring to help us to better understand the extent to which the various sectors need to coexist within the same population group, the same area, and how the sectoral needs and associated factors correlate, thereby aggravating or mitigating the problem. This will lead to a more effective response. We must further strengthen inter-cluster collaboration, such as the guidance on integrated farming risk reduction programming developed by food security, nutrition, wash, and health, promoting an integrated and context-specific assistance package at the household, community, and the health facility level. We have done it in Yemen, and this is being piloted in DRC and Somalia. So addressing the underlying factor of food insecurity and malnutrition requires proactive anticipatory action, including serious investment and strengthening health system and universal health coverage, primary health care in fragile countries, with the implementation of scale up of essential nutrition action throughout the life course, because all age category are affected, and including social protection mechanism to address inequalities. So a multi-sectoral and multi-systemic approach is needed to sustainably address the underlying factors leading to malnutrition, morbidity, and mortality. At the UN Global Action Plan on Child Wasting, which is a framework for action to accelerate progress in preventing and managing child wasting, and the achievement of the G has been developed, coordinated by WHO in close collaboration with FAO, UNHCR, UNICEF, and World Food Program. And its aim to support is really to support countries in prioritizing and coordinating the delivery of preventive and treatment actions across 4 key systems. Number 1 is the food, number 2 is the health, number 3 is social protection, and number 4, water, sanitation, and hygiene. So this plan now needs to be operationalized at country level through the development of country roadmap for action, and really to reiterate WHO commitment to continue working with the UN system. And following the UN Secretary General will convene in 2021 a food system summit to raise global awareness, and we are fully working with our partners on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ibrahima. And indeed, the socioeconomic response plan from the Secretary General of the UN include this social protection floor. We see that where there's no social protection floor, there's a compound effect of economic, social, food, and several other factors that are problematic. And thank you for sticking within your time, which means we may have more time for discussion. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Catherine Bertini to enlighten us on, from her point of view, where we stand. Catherine, you have the floor.
Thank you so very much. And I want to thank USG, Belavia, and also Dr. Jacobs for their invitation to be here today. It's nice to join this distinguished panel. I think you will find that Ibrahima and I have some overlap in terms of some of our views. one of the great successes of the last 70 years has been that the numbers of desperately hungry people have either decreased or in some cases stayed constant while the population of the world was increasing dramatically. If you look at a chart with both of those together, you can see, and I think most people are amazed to see that that is in fact the case. That does not excuse the fact, however, that there are still so many hundreds of millions of people who are desperately hungry and even more who are food insecure, and that society has a responsibility in order to help them. Now, we've seen times when the numbers have jumped up. One was about 10, 12 years ago when there was the global food price crisis. And then we saw increases starting in like 2019, pre-COVID, where prices were increasing and more people were becoming food insecure than in the past. So both of those times went counter to the general trend of the last 70 years. And now, of course, with COVID, we see these numbers increasing exponentially. And so an increased really responsibility of member states and of leadership of member states to do something about this, even more than the responsibility that certainly all of us had before. So one proposal that's before us is to have more bumper stocks. And I am not necessarily a proponent of that. I think there are other actions that are much more important immediately, because we need immediate action in order to help these large numbers of people, growing numbers of people who are food insecure. So I think that it's critically important that we look at the issues of social protection as absolutely key to this, because right now we have the crisis. We don't have the time to make some big new systems, and we're going to lose people in the process just because they don't have enough food. And as Dr. Fall and others can tell us, if someone is ill, not having enough food is just going to exacerbate their problem, and we're going to have many more deaths because people are hungry and then sick. So I think there must be a much bigger priority put on watching the markets, and leadership has to have courage. For instance, courage to keep trade going among countries, so as not to do what was done 12 years ago when people closed their borders. Leaders closed their borders. They thought they were trying to protect their agriculture production, but instead they were hurting their own people because they were keeping out the food from other countries that might also help bring down the prices. We have to be able to bring in other inputs, sometimes cash, sometimes not, but it's very important that we look at programs that I'm sure we can talk about later, like feeding children in school. It's going to help get children to school. It's going to help children be safer. It's going to help children thrive. And also this growing social networks like food banking, and where communities get together to help provide food for people, not just wait till the government, but the government can play a role here too. So I say that this is the time when national leadership needs to stand up and take strong action against the increasing food prices and the growing numbers of people who are at risk of high levels of food security, if not starvation, because of the price increases and food unavailability of the recent past, and now complicated by the global pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. You have 20 seconds left, and please introduce yourself because you forgot to do that and people want to know who you are.
I'm Catherine Bertini. I'm a distinguished fellow of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I'm a champion of the Food Systems Summit, and I was executive director of the World Food Program for 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Giving now the floor to Ismail. Ismail, I saw you earlier. Oh, there you are. So Ismail SERAGELDIN, who speaks very good French. We had our session in French. Ismail, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chantal. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ismail SERAGELDIN. I worked for a long time at the World Bank. I was vice president of the World Bank. I was chairman of the CGIAR, the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research. I was also founding chairman of the CGAP for the Consultative Group to Assist the Poorest, and the founder of the Global Water Partnership. But I left all that and I went back to my home country, Egypt, to become a librarian. And I recreated the ancient library of Alexandria in its modern garb in Alexandria, Egypt. But I've remained very involved with the same issues for all these years, and I'm proud to be with you in this very distinguished panel. Let me move very quickly to build on what was said by our colleagues. And specifically, I would like to raise 3 points, maybe a fourth one as well. The first of these is that we should be talking about food and nutrition security, because the nutritional content of the food is extremely important. Secondly, it should be highly targeted, not just on children, as was mentioned with school programs and so on, but fundamentally, I would say on women, as part of empowering women and part of dealing with the health issue of children. One of the most important interventions that you can have is for a pregnant woman to be well fed, so that when she will be delivering, she will deliver a normal birth weight baby. If she has a low birth weight baby, that baby is very prone to stunting and wastage, and it has a major impact on the brain development later on and their ability to perform and learn. And in addition to that, of course, a healthy mother can also lactate, so we don't have to rely on waterborne diseases and other problems that will emerge in that. And that period from the last trimester in the womb to the first 6 months of life is when a lot of the brain of the baby is being developed. It's extremely important to be done, and it fits with a generally accepted view today, was not in my day, but very generally accepted view today, that empowering women is a key to success in any of these programs. Secondly, I would like to also raise the question that we need a decent wage for people who work in the rural areas as well. That's much more difficult than in the urban areas, although the informal economy exists there too. But fundamentally, there are landless farm labor, and they have no choice. Whatever is on offer, they have to take, or else they don't eat that day. So that we're talking about the latifundia in Latin America or in parts of Asia. But if you look again, in Africa, for example, a very large number of the smallholder farmers are women, and those who produce the food are women, and whatever empowerment we can give them will be extremely important. My third point will be about science. We need to mobilize the science because we are looking at a major disaster coming the way, especially of Africa, where 95% of the agriculture is dependent on rainfall, and where climate change is going to have very erratic rainfall. So you'll have 1 year a flood and 1 year a drought, and it's going to cause major problems and even potentially famines. Now, it's very important that these smallholder farmers, a very large number of whom are women, should get proper food, proper payment for their product, because that constitutes the equivalent of a basic wage, and that needs to be done. Sadly, the cases of buffer stocks in Africa, the caisse de stabilisation, as they were called in parts of West Africa, has not been as successful as one would hope. But then that is a topic that we can continue to discuss in this panel, and I hope we will, because the way in which governments can intervene to complement markets and especially to address market failures and in difficult periods is absolutely essential. Thank you.
Indeed, there's so many things: empowering women, of course, and adaptation to climate change, livable wage. But I also want to go back to Catherine, because I asked her to see who she was and forgot to mention, of course, at UNCTAD, the courage to keep the trade going in these times of crisis, extremely important, of course. and the ship going as well, because we had to intervene because the seafarers could not get out of those ships and the ship could not land. Then that means the product don't get there, which creates food insecurity in itself. But let me move on to another great distinguished speaker, which is Gerda Verburg from SUN. So please, Gerda, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gerda Verburg, and I am the coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, a movement of many stakeholders, UN, private sector, civil society, donors, and countries, that is country-based and country-owned, because the government has decided and promised to make sure that food and nutrition security is on their plate and their responsibility. So this is who I am. A movement approach is very exciting, but at the same time very complicated, but it is the way forward in making progress. I would like to identify 5 problems, 5 opportunities, and 5 reasons to have a paradigm shift. First, the problems. The COVID-19 has created a huge disruption in food systems at all levels. National level, local level, international level, but also regional level, and has brought farmers, food producers in problems, but also consumers. That is one thing. The second point is what I'd like to echo with Ismail. I think using food security is focusing on only one part of it, because too many decision advisors or policy advisors and decision makers are still thinking if you feed the belly, you have done enough. So thinking calories is not enough. You need to combine food and nutrition security, because nutrition is an investment in the physical condition, in the brain development and the smartness of people, and it is delivering the potential productivity which makes it possible for many people to escape poverty. Let's not underestimate this. So please, from now on, always combine food security with nutrition security. Furthermore, I think our current food systems are not doing what they are supposed to do. They are bankrupting health systems, because whether you're malnourished, undernourished, or obese and overweight, 80% or more of all diseases currently are food related. And look at the vulnerability to COVID-19. So that is one thing. Our current food systems are not only bankrupting our health systems, they're also destroying our planet by environmental problems, natural resources destroyment, etc. So we need to think food systems and change the food systems. And there is a fourth and a fifth problem. The fourth problem is that healthy and nutritious foods are more expensive, and sometimes 5 times as expensive as the bulk food, the fast food. And this is why we need to do system thinking. Not only, as my colleague from WHO said, combining food, health, wash, and social protection, but also to bring in the gender perspective, because food and nutrition is always surrounded by women, and women are always the worst victims of it. And I think the connection with socioeconomic development should be brought in. So where are the opportunities? First of all, it is great to see that next year, the Secretary General of the UN is very much decided to chair or preside a food system summit that is a breakthrough compared to other summits, because it's a people's and an actions summit, focusing on people and actions at country level. And it's not about negotiating a document, which is very much action-oriented and is fitting seamlessly in the decade of delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals, because food and nutrition are decisive to reach all the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, many donors are prioritizing health over other support. And this is an opportunity, because if you combine health with other social services, social protection, good nutrition, it is a way to build forward better, not building back better, but to create really resilience by this multi-sectoral approach. And then the next opportunity is, if you take a systems approach and you recognize that COVID-19 has shown us that the systems in many countries are broken, not only in the south, also in the north, delivering for good, and in developed countries, we need to let go the siloed approach of dealing with all topics, health separate, climate separate, biodiversity separate, but bring it together and focus on country ownership. And there you have not only the different sectors, but I think the global players need to commit much more, that they will work shoulder to shoulder at country level amongst themselves, for instance, UN amongst themselves, but also being ready to work with others. Civil society, private sector, investors and donors need to be able to align behind the government, and being ready to have the tough talks. Because too many governments leave the social and people's agenda to the international support systems, and once there is an emergency, they start to look at others to tackle the problem. No, make it part of their system and their accountability, and be ready to have these clear dialogues. Then the paradigm shift, because it's easier said than done. Too many solutions are still dropped from a global level. There is a brilliant plan, there is a fund raised, and then everybody starts to sell this solution to countries. For that reason, it's confusing. Also in the field of food and nutrition security, there are many different approaches. Please bring them together and listen much more to the country level and the demand of ordinary people. Farmers, women, youth, consumers over there, regional community leaders, and bring this agenda to the global level. So instead of top down, start to listen bottom up, and then translate this into an agenda. And then finally, and let me be crystal clear here, talking about women is not good enough anymore. Make sure that they are at the table when it comes to decision making, because empowerment doesn't help to get them, to give them the rights to own land, to have access to services, to have the legal status they deserved. Too often, they are still considered as second-class human beings. And let's invest in the vast opportunity and talents of young people. Bring them to the table, make them co-responsible, let them not only make a speech, but make sure that they are rolling on their sleeves as well, and work shoulder to shoulder with all of us to make this world a better place, leaving no one behind. Thanks.
Thank you for these problems, these opportunities, and then these paradigm shifts. And indeed, women and youth are key. And we do not want to build back better. The system collapsed in 3 months. Who would want to go to a system that collapsed, but which present a great opportunity to build better systems. So Hazel, I know you have many ideas, and you're our last speaker, but not the least. So please go ahead.
I'm Hazel Henderson, and I'm a global futures researcher. And I am CEO of Ethical Markets, and we are a company founded in 2004, which is really a network of what we call socially responsible ethical investors and asset managers. And I helped develop all of the screens that we now use for environmental, social, and criteria for investors. And I want to agree with all of the wonderful statements of the panelists. And I would like to just really underline that we have to reform the global financialization, particularly of our food system, and concentrate, of course, on the right to food as a right to life. And we have to see the global food system as a massive market failure, similar to the market failure in climate change. And so we must insulate food from the speculative market forces and the price volatility in global commodity trading. And all of our global network really is focused very much on reforming finance, because markets are very important and prices are very important tools, but we must understand where they do not work. And they do not work in the food system. So basically, we have to focus on protecting human lives, local farmers, and the livelihoods of those who produce our food in all regions of the world. And we have to do away with the subsidies to unsustainable food production, which is going on at the moment. And so I agree totally about the need to protect buffer stocks, both at the local level and very importantly, the regional level. Because this protects them from markets which have failed and gives them back to the political system of the countries involved. And we can involve more NGOs, more cooperatives, and of course, our network of socially responsible investors are extremely interested and caring about this issue, made much worse, of course, by the pandemic. Even in the USA, we have 40 million American citizens now who are food insecure. And we see the lines in front of food banks to prove how this, the marketplace is not appropriate as a way of organizing the global food system. And so we work with investing consortia who are speaking to Gerda's very important point about nutrition. And we are very much focused on investing in the 150 startup companies now, shifting away from meat diets, which of course, as we know, produce 15% of all the greenhouse gases in the world, to plant-based protein foods and beverages, which is now, you know, a double-digit growing market in the world, which will create better nutrition. And last of all, we really have to address the often blind reliance of all global foods we eat on glycophyte plants. These plants are the ones that need fresh water, and the planet only has 3% of the world's fresh water, and that's dwindling. And so we focus very much on researching the other half of the plant kingdom, which are halophyte plants, which are salt-loving plants like quinoa and many, many others, which are now hybridized. There's the salt-tolerant rice, which is marketed in China. There is Salicornia. And if we can expand our food system to use saltwater agriculture as well as ocean foods like kelp farms, and so this is, I think, the direction in the future. But for right now, I agree, we have to focus on shielding the regional buffer stocks and the regional producers from the depredation, I would say, of speculative markets which have failed so badly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, as you can see, this is a complex issue, and we have, even on this 5 panelists, quite different views. So Catherine was doubtful about these regional stocks, buffer stocks. Hazel is in complete support, and Hazel is challenging the market forces, but still investing in startups, which is totally market-driven and finance-driven. And so it is a complex issue that needs to bring all these things together. We had prepared question, and we have some question that have come on our chat box. I'd like to ask you, Gerda, to talk about the food security as a fundamental human right in the context of what you do. Could you address these issues that were just raised in terms of market buffer stocks, and where does that stand in terms of, and then where should women be to make these decisions?
Well, women should be everywhere, but I think Hazel is better positioned than I am to drive this agenda, though I very much appreciate her agenda, and wherever I can support her, please let me know. On the other side, I think I'm well positioned to do what I have to do and drive the country-led, country-owned systemic changes, at the same time encouraging the global institutions to start thinking in a different way. Not the top-down idea, but a bottom-up. Let us make it a country's agenda instead of a market thing, and let us rethink and redirect subsidies. Because Hazel, in principle, I agree with you, the current food and agricultural subsidies are stimulating the wrong things. But if we could use the same amount, about $600 billion a year, to encourage farmers and food producers and give them a decent income for what they do, for also public goods like natural resources, greenhouse gas storage, etc. If we could really reward them and give them a decent income so that they can feed their family, send their children to school, pay their health checks, then I think we are heading into direction. So let's make it a two-direction approach. Hazel, with all her activities at global level and supporting these networks of socially responsible investors, and we coming from the country level. And I have the feeling, Hazel, that after this meeting, so thank you for bringing us together, we will try to find each other. Yes. I would also like to embrace what Ismail has said. Let us find ways to get rid of this thinking in food security. It's very stubborn. It's very stubborn. And too many ministers of agriculture only think in crops and yields, and agriculture and food production is seen as an economic tool and not as a tool or a means to invest in people. And we know that only healthy people who are smart, children who have been able to not only develop their brains, but use their brains and train their brains in education, that they are able to take care of themselves, their families, and also find smart solutions and ways forward for their country. So I would say the currency of human and economic development of the future is people, healthy, smart people. So let's start to invest in it. It's not rocket science, it's not very expensive, but let's then start with prevention. And there, what Ismail said, let's make sure that healthy women and adolescent girls are well nourished so that they can become pregnant, can have their carry their baby, but also breastfeed a baby, because breastfeeding is really a miracle of the creation. It has everything that kickstarts the life of children to the best possible.
Thank you so much, Gerda. And we're getting something very serious here. So we get a lot of questions in the chat box also about a livable wage, a living wage. And so, and this, as Ismail, you mentioned the idea that the people without land need to have a livable wage, and that's what they paid in the market, but also how much smallholder farmers are paid for their commodities down the supply chain also is part of having a living wage. So I'd like to go back. So if it's okay with Ibrahima, we're gonna go to Ismail because we had established an order, but maybe it makes more sense for Ismail, especially given what Gerda just said, that you go next. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chantal. I just want to say that you know, we talked about the buffer stock experience of India, but there's another very interesting experience, and it may interest some people that even though I had a long career in the World Bank, I'm a very strong supporter of labor unions and cooperative movements. And there is an experience which has been recognized by a World Food Prize, and that was by Kurian in India, where he organized the milk producers. I mean, the person who has one cow and so on and produces milk, and into a cooperative. And as he had sent out his challenge, he succeeded that India displaced the United States as the world's largest milk producer at the time by organizing small farmers. And you know, it can be done. We've seen it with microfinance programs, whether it's Grameen or BRAC or so on, to reach the unreached, the poorest people. It can be done. But the problem is that if you're looking to say, well, the government will set the minimum wage, tough luck. The people in the rural areas, landless farm labor in rural areas are not protected. And if they don't work that day, they don't eat at the end of the day. So you have a very difficult situation, and it requires organization at the grassroots. And I think we have many examples of that it can be done, it can work. And in other areas, of course, as more and more of the population is moving to urban centers around the world, then organization becomes even more important, because NGOs working with labor unions, working with cooperative movements and so on, do provide an alternative mechanism by which we can supplement the market failures that exist. And we know why many of these market failures exist, from everything, bad calculation of GNP, et cetera, that has no environmental or social dimensions into it, but we can deal with all of that. But I think I just wanted to emphasize the fact that we have had examples of this, and it can be done bottom up, and these examples are truly inspiring.
When you talk about cooperative, of course, it brings the idea of another type of organization of the market, which is social solidarity economy, right? And that is a way to use the market that is a bottom-up, maybe more resilient approach. And the example with milk producers in India is definitely one of them. But also, instead of, as Gerda said, using these subsidies to just support commodity production, maybe if we were to use them to support these cooperatives and train them and in better production methods, then we could actually achieve a lot of these goals that were just mentioned. So now we're going to move Ibrahima. I want you to come in on this, on these issues, including from a human rights approach. How would you address this dichotomy with, how do we address this market approach with the human rights approach?
Thank you, Chantal. You know, as I said earlier, from a health perspective, food security and nutrition are key determinant of, you know, health and public health. So if you consider public health as a human right, clearly you cannot not talk about food security and nutrition. So from WHO perspective, both food security and health are fundamental human rights. So that's why it's important in our way of promoting health to take into account this determinant of food security and nutrition, to make sure that people, you know, during their life course can have this additional thing from the food security angle to be able to protect themselves against not only infectious diseases, but also non-communicable diseases. So without secure access to food and nutrition, we will continue, you know, being the firefighter running after outbreaks, running after non-communicable diseases, because just people are not well in a position to respond at, you know, from their immunity. So that's why it's important for us to work with other sectors, because we don't have the means and have a competitive advantage to secure food. That's why we bring the advocacy from the health perspective, making sure that we work with other sectors to ensure food security. Thank you.
But from your health point of view, And from your experience, what could be some option for securing this food that you might have not heard, or maybe that you heard that you actually could support and think if you've seen it work?
I think it's important to take into account the specific needs for different age group, different people with specific vulnerability. So this is what we can add, showing the risk and the vulnerability people might have, and making sure that we are not just distributing rice, for example, but we take into account the specific need of, under 5, specific need of elder people. So these people can be really protected because they have access to the food they need based on the condition, based on the age and level of development.
In our 62 member countries, we have worked with people to make sure that a healthy food package is connected to health support in the COVID-19 crisis. So in every emergency package, you should secure a healthy and nutritious food. It brings people closer to come to ask for medical support, because don't underestimate that many people don't trust hospitals. But if you make it a combined action, it might be they might trust it more, and it's more helpful and attractive for them. So this is one thing. And I would like to also call upon global investors. They now very heavily invest in getting the vaccine to all countries and getting the vaccine injected as soon as possible. Great. But why don't we combine it with an action and activity to make sure that people also can invest in their own food and nutrition security? So to give you an example, with Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccination thing, we have agreed that we will align at country level and combine the services to people, especially in the remote area, the services to people on vaccination and making sure that the nutrition and food services are delivered. So with this, thank you very much for having me. Now I really have to leave.
Thank you so much, and great point before you leave, this idea of combining, because that would get us closer to this social protection floor that we're talking about, and also address some of the trust. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to see you, and I'm sure we will continue discussion with you. Moving right along, because I'm sure that Catherine has quite a bit to add to this. So maybe Catherine, you could come back on some of the issues that's been raised on the market, on the buffer stock, on affordable prices, but also related to school and community supplemental banks, but also in the chat, quite a few people are asking about, well, if we don't have stock in our countries, which is, I think it was India, then how do we secure food for our population? Small question for you, Catherine.
Sure. Chantal, I've been trying to respond to some of the comments in chat. And so let me start, first of all, Ismail, thank you for raising the issues of women and their critical roles in food. I recall 25 years ago in Beijing, we talked about this. And but one of the things that it led to was realizing, especially from the World Food Program perspective, that if we were going to end hunger, we had to partner with the women. So we were asked or challenged in Beijing at the Women's Conference to change the way we operate. And so we said, yes, we have to do that. We have to listen to women. We have to work in communities to help elevate women into decision-making positions, because we can't just go ask the mayor or someone for what the community needs. We have to be listening to the women. We helped encourage tribal chiefs in tribal groups throughout then Southern Sudan to include women in their community decision-making processes, because they knew more about the needs of the food needs of the families. We did a lot of things, and then we had to even hire more women ourselves, because we had to have women to be able to talk to women. So so that was the beginning, but it needs to be highlighted, and I'm delighted that Ismail did that. I'd like to suggest several different practical things, because there's so many people I think that I'm seeing on the comments here who are actually working in so many of these issues in the field. One is, I mentioned school feeding. Everybody knows how important school feeding is, but there's an organization I want to make sure you know about, and that's called the Global Child Nutrition Foundation. And they actually have a network of school feeding programs all around the world, and they give training, or they do technology transfer of, gee, maybe this organization in Zambia could be helpful to this organization in Vietnam. I mean, they look for who's doing the similar kind of things and are really helpful with each other. So Global Child Nutrition Foundation. Second, on the food banking side, which has grown exponentially during COVID, but food banks are always important to reach the people who fall out of the social network. Now they're even more important, as Hazel mentioned. So there's a group called the Global Food Banking Network. Same concept. They share information among different countries in food banking, and there's many, many more. They've got at least 100 countries more that have been in touch with them about wanting more information. And in fact, they give grants to food banking as well. And then I'm really hopeful that organizations like GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and by the way, I'm on the board, so I have to mention that, Harvest Plus, and the CG system that Ismail used to chair, that these organizations that do really great work, but are often forgotten in the process, that we go back to them and say, how can we strengthen organizations like this to help us on issues of nutrition, on issues of research, and issues of supporting the needs in countries, especially countries in the South. So, I wanted to share those as I think some really concrete context that people could have. But then my final point goes back to, and I'll circle back to, I think it was Greta that said, the ministers of agriculture think only of crops and yields. Now, I've long said that I think, and excuse my language here, but I think that nutrition is the bastard stepchild of agriculture and health. It's really important to both, and it's really important to successful human outcomes, but it's not in the front line of either one. And both areas and experts in both areas could have a really significant impact on nutrition if they chose to do it. And that brings us back to my quote, which is, courage is a critical component of effective global leadership. And we need that from agriculture ministers and health ministers and presidents and prime ministers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Very, very eloquent, and indeed. And thankfully, nutrition has been included in the SDGs. It's no longer just food security, but it's food security and nutritious food and sustainable agriculture. So at least there was some step made there. But as you say, it needs to now show up in policies and mechanism that we put forward. Ismail, don't worry, I will come back to you, but I need to give the floor to Hazel first, unless you think you want to challenge her, so she answers to you. But otherwise, I'll go to her and then I'll come back to you.
Yes, I agree with Catherine very much. And I want to emphasize again that markets are useful tools and money is a useful tool, but we have to clarify where markets work and where they fail. And just to give you another example, beyond the 150 small startup companies in plant-based foods and beverages, which we track, I'd just like to give an example of one of our partners in Brazil, Sinal do Vale. And they are a learning community on about 150 hectares of land near Rio de Janeiro. And they realize that they are surrounded by jackfruit trees, which, you know, a jackfruit will feed a village. They grow to 50 pounds, highly nutritious. And so the leader, the woman who leads that, Thais Corral, a very famous woman in Brazil, she is starting a jackfruit marketing operation. What's wrong with that?
So Hazel, we're gonna end in 3 minutes, and I'm ready to forgo my time. But Ismail, you wanted a time of response, so I want you to come in, and then if anybody else among the panelists has something to say, we have about 2 minutes. Ismail.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, but we have one particular subgroup that has not been mentioned at all in this discussion, and I think we absolutely have to remember them. And these are the displaced people and refugees. There are tens of millions of them right now, and it's disastrous, the conditions in which they live, the susceptibility to pandemic, but more importantly, the absence of proper nutrition and food in many of these refugee camps, or even in the advanced countries. It is a disgrace how they were treated in Europe, for example. The immigrants who are running away, and expect more of that in the future. My second and last point is really, we have not mentioned sufficiently that the 3 pillars of improving both nutritious food and its availability to the poor will be science, will be better management, and specifically in terms of science, we have the IT and the new biology. And the IT has proven itself that very poor people manage it very well. M-Pesa in Kenya shows how they turned it into a banking system for the poor. So there's a lot of possibilities that we have not barely touched on, but then that's the limit of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ismail. And as you can see on your screen, the World Academy of Art and Science, our friend Gary Jacobs is here. He's heard of your proposal. Now you have 20 seconds each. If there's one thing you want us to know that you think we should consider, that is the one takeaway from this session. Now is the time. Otherwise, I will, Catherine, yes?
Leadership, be creative, be strong, be tough. There's people that are suffering and dying, and leaders can do something about it at every level.
Indeed. And we have an opportunity, as Gerda said, because we have this crisis has created an opportunity to make the change we've been working on, as was mentioned before, for 25 years now. Now we have opportunity to change those seemingly unchangeable markets and mechanisms, because this crisis is so profound that it often this opportunity. Catherine, you mentioned the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, Global Food Bank Network. We need to go back and see. And the CGIAR, Ismail, I also used to work for IFPRI. Great work that they're doing. They're doing a lot of work at the country level. How do we bridge this country level to the top level where the courage needs to be as well? And we have the framework. We have the SDGs. We have the means of implementation to the financing for development. And we have the mind power. Look at this group. So with this, thank you so much to my panel. You were excellent. You were fantastic. Thank you to people that followed us and put your question in the chat. It really enriched this discussion. So over to the organizers. Thank you.